Georgia Boot is most known for their work boots, but recently they released a heritage budget boot that's made in small batches. So today I'm going to cut one in half to see what you really get for a budget heritage boot, and thanks to Georgia Boot for sponsoring this video. Now let's go over the boot information. So the brand is Georgia Boot. The style is a small batch casual boot. The color is brown and black. I've got one of each here. They weigh 1 pound 7 ounces. They're currently on sale for $115 and they're made in China. Now let's go over the information that we can gather about these boots before we cut it in half, starting with the upper and the leather. So this is a chrome tanned leather, and it's a hot stuffed leather, which basically means they just put tons and tons of oils and waxes and conditioners inside of the leather to give it a nice supple saturated feel that also gives you a lot of nice pull up and a lot of potential for patina. And it also is a very maintenance-free boot because it doesn't need a whole lot of conditioning because there's so much worked into it. But hot stuffed leather like this is prone to wrinkling. You can see as you start to bend this and crease it, it wrinkles quite a bit because there's so much worked into the leather. It just bends in a different way. And part of that is because this is a little bit thinner leather as well, because it comes in at 1.7 millimeters thick, which is fine for a casual leather. You know, it's on the lower end of an acceptable range for leather, especially for a boot. You know, this is more of the thickness that you see in a sneaker, that 1.5 to 1.7 millimeters thick. But this is a casual boot, and it's a budget boot, so I think it's totally fine. And then to the lining. So this boot is lined in the vamp only with the fabric liner, and it does have an internal counter cover that is leather, which is really good to see especially for a budget boot. But other than that, it's not lined in the quarters or anywhere else. And if we pull the insole out, we can see it's just a basic foam insert that looks like it's topped with a little bit of pigskin, and they call it their recycled green algae infused EVA footbed. And underneath of it, you've got another layer of orange foam for a little bit more squish. And then if we move to the construction, so on their website, they say it's a Goodyear welted boot, and it looks like a Goodyear welted boot, but I've been fooled in the past by a fake Goodyear welt, so we'll really see when we get it cut in half, because sometimes companies get away with messing with the jargon a little bit, and technically it's a Goodyear welt, but there's some weird stuff on the inside that isn't quite up to the standards of a typical Goodyear welt. So that's why we cut them in half. And then next to the outsole, so this is Vibram's Eton outsole that's infused with cork. So it's basically a mixture of rubber and cork. It gives you some of the squish and the lightweightness of cork and the durability and grip of rubber. But I was actually pretty surprised that it's an actual Vibram outsole. A lot of times with boots in this price range, you see kind of a knockoff brand or a self-branded outsole that's not quite up to the Vibram standard of quality. And then if you look at the leather heel stack underneath of that Vibram top lift, they say it's a leather heel stack, but it doesn't look like it's layers of leather, so I'm not exactly sure how it's leather. And it might be a reconstituted leather, but you can see that it is nailed on. You see the nails going through the heel, and you can even see them going through the inside as well. And one thing I do like about this Goodyear welt is it is a leather welt. You know, a lot of times with the thorough goods at that $200 to $250 price point, you see a lot of fake welts and a lot of plastic welts. So at least this welt is leather. As for the midsole, this looks like it's some sort of rubber or cork infused rubber midsole. There's a layer, and it's easier to see on this brown boot. There's a layer right underneath the welt that's black, and I'm not exactly sure what it is. And as for what else is on the inside, I'm not really sure how this whole sole is constructed and how much is actually leather and how much is not. And then to the last thing I want to cover is the fit, feel, and look, because these are a lot wider than most heritage boots. You know, they're not so wide that they look like they're duck feet, but they are wider than most of your Red Wings and all these other brands that are pretty narrow, which makes these really good for like a starter heritage boot or someone who likes a little bit wider toe box that has wider feet. And other than that, that's about everything we know, because the real questions are, how is the sole built and the construction on the inside? So let's cut this thing in half. That might have been the worst chop job I've ever done, but let's see what's inside. So now we can clearly see that layer in the heel isn't layers of leather like we see in a more expensive boot. It's a reconstituted leather, which basically means they take a bunch of leather fibers, grind them up, and reconstitute it with some sort of rubber compound to give it that squish and that durability. So it's a cheaper way of adding leather to the heel. And then if we look at the actual construction on the inside, there's no leather in here whatsoever, because underneath of that orange foam, we have a fiberboard, and then underneath that, we got that shank that I completely massacred. And then underneath that filling that's caused by the Goodyear welt, usually it's filled with cork in a higher and more expensive boot, but with this one, they have a layer of foam on the inside. And then underneath there, we can clearly see that midsole layer is a cork-infused rubber, just like the outsole, but it's just a softer compound, so it's gonna be a little bit more squishy and maybe compressed just a little bit more than the outsole will. And now we can see a little bit better how the heel is attached on. It's attached with that 360 Goodyear welt, with the leather welt, but it also has those nails driven down from the inside and driven back up through the outside of the heel. So the way this boot is built is just like those boots that are twice the price, but they use a lot cheaper materials all the way through the boot. Instead of a leather insole, they use fiberboard. Instead of cork, they use foam. Instead of that leather stacked heel, they use that reconstituted leather. Instead of a leather midsole, they use that cork rubber midsole. And instead of a leather counter, they use this elastic counter. But the actual techniques used to build this boot are the same that you see in the more expensive boots that are twice the price, with the nailed on heel and the 360 Goodyear welt. So why is that important? And in my opinion, more important than the interior components? Well, most boots in this price range are just glued together. And as we've seen multiple times, a lot of times you can just grab the heel and completely rip them apart. Ooh, easy peasy. But where this is completely stitched together and built like a classical heritage boot, there's no way you can rip this apart. You know, that stitching is always gonna hold up much stronger than any sort of glue. So what this boot really is the most affordable way to make a true heritage style boot made just like all the other heritage style boots. But you're sacrificing quality and longevity and durability to get it to this certain price point. So then who is this boot actually for? Well, this is a really good starter boot. You know, it's a good entry-level boot. If you're someone who hasn't owned a heritage style boot and you're wanting to try the style out, but you're not willing to commit to a $300 boot, this boot will give you the look and the feel of a heritage style boot with a little bit easier break-in period because of the synthetic materials and the thinner leather and the slightly wider toe box, and it's around the price of a nicer pair of sneakers. And if you end up loving the style, then you can wear this boot for a couple seasons, and when you save up enough money, you can buy more of the $300 plus range that has a lot of leather in the construction itself that you'll be able to get several resoles out of. But keep in mind, with this boot, you might be able to get one resole out of it, but with all these synthetic materials on the inside, eventually those are going to wear out and crack and break. And that's the big downfall and the downside of synthetic materials. If you can get these boots on sale for $115, they're significantly better than any other $115 sneaker. And so I think they're worth it for that price point. Maybe at full price, they're not worth it quite as much. And if you disagree, let me know which boot at this price point from $180 and under beats this boot, because I haven't seen it so far. You know, the Brunts were not great. The Converse boots were not great. And especially the Birkenstock boots, which are more expensive than these ones, have the fake welt and everything, are significantly worse than this boot in my opinion. So let me know what you guys think. And thank you guys for everything you do. See ya.